what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we will be doing my first impressions on the brand new Leica SL3. If you're new to the channel, I am a portrait photographer based out of Miami, Florida, and I primarily shoot with Sony and Leica. If you're familiar with the channel, you know that I've been a huge fan of Leica's new 60 megapixel sensor that was introduced with the Leica M11, the Leica Q3, and I'm glad to say it's finally here in their new SL3. Even though that's a pretty big improvement and it brings a lot of cool new features, I think what everybody's going to be the most excited about is the fact that Leica finally introduced face detect autofocus on their flagship body. And that is going to be a game changer. But for this video, I want to make sure I'm clear here. This is a first impressions video. I've used this camera for about 2.5 weeks. I've only done one paid shoot with it. I've done a little bit of street photography, and I did a little bit of car photography with my new car, which you'll see here in a little bit. And I wanted to put this video together to kind of go over my first impressions. Another thing I want to mention is I bought this camera with my own money. So no, Leica did not send me this camera. This video is not sponsored by anybody. I purchased this camera with my own money, and all these opinions and what I'm about to say is how I feel about this camera. With that being said, let's kick things off. I will be providing image samples for you to download and check out so you can see the image quality and you can see what I'm talking about as I'm showing you these images in this video. I'm going to cover a few things. I want to cover ergonomics and the new body, image quality, and of course, autofocus. So let's kick things off with ergonomics and this new body. So Leica made the SL3 a little bit smaller and lighter than the SL2. And when I first read that, I got a little scared, because one of my favorite things about the SL system is the way the camera feels in hand. I think Leica has one of the best grips out there because it's a very deep and substantial grip. Now, I gotta say this, I'm 6'4", I have fairly large hands, and for me, as a Sony shooter as well, the one area I've always struggled with is the grips in mirrorless cameras. I understand that companies wanna make their cameras smaller, but the lenses aren't smaller, and it's just an uncomfortable experience for me when the grip's tiny with a massive lens. The SL body has always been one of the best grips, one of the most substantial grips, and one of the best feeling cameras. So when I read that the camera was a bit smaller, I got a little bit scared, but I'm here to tell you, if you've used an SL, this feels like an SL body. The construction, the build quality, the grip, it's all there. It's just now in a smaller, more compact, lighter package. So overall, great improvements because it preserved what the SL body stands for, but still made it smaller without any compromises. Another cool addition is they added another top dial to the SL body, which means you now can really control your exposure triangle with the top two dials, aperture ring on a lens, or the scroll wheel in the back. Again, that is a very nice feature because you don't have to go into menus to change anything. It's all available within the camera's buttons and dials. The camera also added a flippy screen. Now, actually, it's not a flippy screen. It's just a articulating screen. And I personally love it. They introduced this type of screen and hinge design on the Leica Q3, and it is extremely substantial. It's not like other mirrorless cameras where it feels flimsy. This thing is sturdy. And as a professional photographer, if you're shooting low or you're shooting high, having the flexibility to move your screen around is helpful. I don't understand when people complain about the screen and having this new feature. I get that aesthetically speaking, it looks better if it's flush, but this is a tool, and having the option to move the screen to get the shot, I don't understand why you would argue against that, and I'm glad Leica added it. And with all these changes, Leica still preserved the dust and weather sealing in this camera, which is best in class, and preserve what the SL stands for. So from an ergonomic standpoint, Leica hit a home run with this camera, and I'm really liking the SL3. From an image quality perspective, another home run here. Like I mentioned, this is the same sensor used in the Q3 and M11, and even though it's the same sensor, it's slightly tweaked for each camera. So 60 megapixels across the board, you have the triple resolution technology, which means you can shoot at lower megapixels but still shoot a raw file. Again, even though it's the same sensor, you're gonna have some differences between all three cameras, but the one difference you're not gonna have is you have incredible resolution, incredible detail, and incredible dynamic range. Low light is also pretty decent. You can shoot this camera at 6400 comfortably. And if you use Adobe's denoise, you can probably push it to 12,800 and still get pretty solid images. I'm pretty familiar with this sensor. I also think it's the same sensor Sony uses that I have in my Sony a7R5, which I'm using right now, and my a7CR. So having all my cameras be 60 megapixels just adds parity across the board, and I'm glad it's here. Image quality of this camera is great, and I really have nothing to complain about. This is one of the best sensors in the market. With Leica's color science, it's a win-win. But everybody is probably waiting for this part. What about autofocus? Before I go into that, I used to shoot with the SL2S. I even shot with the SL2 for a little bit. And the one reason I was never able to fully switch to Leica was because of the autofocus system. I just couldn't trust it. It was decent in portrait shoots, but like if there was a moving subject, the continuous tracking just was not up to par to the competitors. And to me, that was a deal breaker to fully switch into the SL system. Also for me, if I'm gonna fully switch to the system, I needed to have good autofocus for video. I'm filming this video on my Sony. So if I can't trust it, I can't fully switch. I think this camera changes the game for me because I will now be able to fully switch to Leica without any compromises. So is the autofocus great? Let's slow down a little bit. The autofocus is finally, I think, good enough. So with the phase detect autofocus, tracking is no longer an issue. And I did a family shoot with this camera when I had kids running, I had the couple walking towards me, I had a lot of movement, and I didn't really have any missed shots because of the autofocus system. Now, this camera doesn't have the fastest frame rate, so I think it's 5 frames per second. And at that frames per second, it's able to autofocus, it's able to track, and I had 0 issues. As a matter of fact, the only issue I had with the camera is the interface. Let me explain. So when you shoot Sony, I think Canon does this, and even Nikon, when you have phase detect and eye detect, it only puts a little square in the eyes. And it only puts a square in the eye of the person it's focusing on. So you're able to see everybody's faces, and you know which eye is in focus on which person. With the SL, it puts a square on everybody's face, and it highlights everybody's eyes, and then the eye that's in focus, it's green. I should have taken a picture when I was doing this family session so you can see. And the reason why it's a problem is I'm shooting this family, the camera's picking up all 4 faces and all sets of eyes, but I can no longer see their faces or their expressions because I'm at a pretty far distance. So having the square and the eye highlighted, now I can't see their expression. I can't see if they're looking somewhere else. It kind of obstructs your view. Again, with different cameras systems, the Sony or Canon, you only have just the square on the eye that's in focus. And you can still switch between people and toggle, but it's not constantly highlighted. So if Leica could kind of change their interface on how they do it, I like the fact that you can see it's picking up everybody's face and you can see it's picking up everybody's eyes, but now you're kind of obstructing your view and you really can't see their expression. That's a bit of a problem. So the autofocus works. The interface itself, not the biggest fan. Hopefully, I can get an example of it from maybe next video so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm gonna search online to see if there's an image of it so I can kind of show it here. And that's my only gripe with the new autofocus system with the Leica SL3. Another thing to note is if you look at the history of Leica and how they've supported their cameras over the years, what you get day one is not what you get in a year or two. Leica is one of the few companies out there that actually continue to support the cameras for years. And the SL2 and the SL2S, their autofocus today, even though it's not perfect, it's leaps and bounds better than when the camera launched, which tells me this autofocus is good. It's still not up to par with Sony or Canon, but you can now do everything with it without any issues. What I mean by it's not as good as the competitors, it's just not as fast. But this is version 1 of their autofocusing system, which means in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, it's going to continue to get better. And if we follow the trend that we follow with the Leica SL2, SL2S, Q2, it's going to get significantly better over time, which means this foundation is really solid. And I think it's going to be great with time and firmware upgrades. So overall, these are my first impressions on the SL3. I'm really stoked about this camera. This camera solves some of the issues and quirks I was having previously with the SL2 and the SL2S, and by that I mean the autofocus, and brings it in a smaller, tighter, compact body with an articulating screen, higher resolution sensor. It's a win-win. So even though it's my first impressions, it's pretty easy for me to say I recommend the SL3, and I look forward to fully switching over to Leica here in the next coming months, because with this camera paired with my Leica Q3, I now have the perfect pair of same sensors, autofocus, and everything I needed in a kit to have a fully exclusive Leica kit for my professional work. And with that said, if you like this video, stay tuned because my next video will be a comparison between the new Sigma 50mm f1.2 for the L mount, which most of the photos you saw in this video are shot with the Leica 50mm f2 Apo SL. They're both almost the same size, difference in price, and obviously difference in aperture, but I'm comparing those two lenses next so you can see some of the differences in image quality, and if you pick up the SL, give you an idea of maybe which 50mm to choose from. So if you want to check that out, please hit the subscribe button. And as always, guys, smash the like button. If you have any questions, want to have a conversation, drop a comment down below. Don't forget to download the image samples I'm providing so you can see the image quality I'm talking about. You can see the autofocus in action. You can see how sharp the images are. And smash the subscribe button. I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good one. Peace.